Shana Tova. As many of you know, I had the great opportunity to take a sabbatical this summer with my family. Sabbaticals are intended to be a journey of learning, and tonight I want to share what I learned about the courage that we need to begin such a journey, and tomorrow morning I'll share what I learned about the strength that we have to harbor in order to return home. During my second year of rabbinical school, I was invited to apply for the Adventure Rabbi Fellowship. The Adventure Rabbi is an actual person. It's a woman ordained from HUC named Jamie Korngold. Rabbi Korngold had what some people described as an alternative rabbinate. She had no synagogue, no office, no need for a closet for dress suits or heels for work. Her shoes were hiking boots. Her Torah was carried in a double-lined backpack, waterproof, so she could carry it through the snow. Her office was most often the Rocky Mountains outside of Boulder, Colorado. Her rabbinate continues to thrive today, and many colleagues, some of whom were with me on that fellowship, have made their rabbinate alongside her, helping her to expand this work of taking Judaism out into the wilderness. And so this summer, I felt connected to her in some way. As we traveled for 5 weeks camping across New England, we were back on her turf. Shabbatot were spent with the mountains behind us. Our work shoes were hiking boots, our achievements measured by how high we climbed and the sights that we saw. In our family, I'm the planner of trips like this, and Carrie is the packer. We had been planning and packing for months. And so as our travels began, we found ourselves saying eventually on a daily basis, this is not a vacation, this is not a trip, this is an adventure. But ironically, we weren't referring to what I thought an adventure was. We climbed to the tops of mountains, but that was not when we proclaimed this sense of adventure. We pushed ourselves physically in ways we had not, but that too was not when we claimed that this was an adventure. The A word, as I'll call it, came out when things were unpredictable. It came out when the world surprised us. When we were out for a hike miles from our car and the skies opened up and it began to rain, we would say, it's an adventure. When we planned a relaxing day at the beach, but we happened upon a beached baby seal in need of help, well, this is an adventure. When one of the boys developed an unexplainable rash out of nowhere, or when we found out that the bridge that we were approaching with our car and our RV behind us was too low, well, this is going to be an adventure. You see, an adventure is not defined by the rugged nature of the scenery. It is not defined by how dangerous something is or even how different something is. The A word is not about a far-off place. It is about our perspective. It is about our attitude toward the world wherever we sit and wherever we stand. This attitude, this perspective is so Jewish that what I thought when we returned from our adventure was, it makes no sense to me why a rabbi would need to augment her title with such a word. It makes no sense to me why Jewish people, or any people for that matter, would say that they're not adventurous. Especially not us. As I wrote in this month's bulletin, theologian Bruce Epperly reminds us that the Bible is an adventure story, describing a people's experience of an adventurous God. Adventure is not something new to us. It's not something that we or anyone else, for that matter, find foreign. It, in fact, is our origin story. It describes how we overcame slavery, how we learned to trust new leaders like Moses. And wouldn't Moses say that the adventure was not climbing the mountain? Wasn't that the easiest of the things that he did? He would say that the adventure was what happened when he came down. It was life. More specifically, it was, as our Shabbat prayer book states, the moments when we had to hold hands, when we had to march together. It was walking a little more every day without knowing exactly where you're going. Isn't that what we do when we wake up in the morning? And so, with plenty of time to think about words over this summer and plenty of time in the mountains, I've come to realize that this A word is a word I cannot reserve for mountaintops. It's a word to say every day. It is a word, perhaps the word for this day, the first day of this year, especially following the year that we've had. And yet, a colleague pointed out recently how bad we are at this. In his words, we tend to drive into the future while only looking in the rearview mirror. In the word adventure, we can summarize our people's story, and in this one word at this time, we can move out of this moment, this too often fear-filled moment, into a new year. It is this word that I pray gives us the courage to face such fears. For the world can sap our strength. It can make us risk averse and unadventurous places, but as Moses ibn Ezra said, only those who persist in knocking on the door will enter. We must be persistent, forward-facing, adventurous, future-looking people. And we must stop driving down the road while only looking behind us. Having an attitude of adventure, first and foremost, admits that no matter what our past has been, we cannot be frozen in fear. And so, on this day, on Rosh Hashanah, we knock and knock and knock again, because the only thing we know about the future is that it will be different and new. Hayom Harat Olam, we say on this day. Rosh Hashanah declares that the world is once again born anew, that today the slate is wiped clean, that we get to start over. So let's face it with hope and optimism, and most importantly, with courage. When Carrie and I were dating and our relationship became serious, we decided to go out to a nice restaurant, which at the time was defined by something that was nicer than anything I'd been to and unaffordable for a rabbinical student. Some people would call this a date, but I think it is fair to describe it more accurately as an interrogation over a glass of wine. What does it mean to be married to a rabbi, she said. And implied in this question were 1,000 others. Will we keep kosher? What will I cook? Do I have to stop driving on Saturdays and spend every Friday night at temple? And tell me, do I have to know Hebrew? I don't recall all of the questions, but I remember doing my best to explain that life would be normal. That being married to a rabbi is no different than being married to an accountant. That she would not have to go to temple any more than she wanted to, and that she'd never have to buy tickets for the High Holy Days ever again, something she always despised. In short, I lied. I lied often. Not because I knew that the answers were not the ones that she wanted to hear, but because the truth was, I had no idea what the future would look like. None of us do. But the right thing to do, the Jewish thing to do, the adventurous thing to do is to turn our heads toward that future, to look in that direction, to stop worrying about the past and start planning for something entirely new. That's what Carrie did that night. She was future-focused. She had a lot of questions. But none of them had to do with where we had been. All of them had to do with where we would go. Hayom Harat Olam, the world is born anew every day. I was taught a great lesson about this phrase a few weeks ago from a colleague, Karen Tomasho, a rabbi in Cincinnati. She said that this phrase is actually adapted from the book of Jeremiah, and that it is not just Hayom Harat Olam. That in its original form, it's Varach Ma Harat Olam. Not that the world is born anew, But in fact, the world is eternally pregnant. Rosh Hashanah doesn't tell us that we will be able to go back and redo what we have done. It reminds us that our world, no matter how challenging, is filled with opportunity. Our world is pregnant with opportunity, which is not to say that the future will be perfect or easy or even better. We all know that being pregnant is not without its scares, that having children is not without its challenges, but regardless, it is ultimately a hopeful enterprise. It is the adventure of all adventures. To be pregnant in this moment means that there is a future promised to us, and that future will be something we cannot possibly predict with any degree of certainty. And so we stand on this threshold of a new year, and if we have an attitude of adventure, we look to the uncertain future, not with fear in our eyes, but with curiosity, with questions. And we tell ourselves, the one thing I know is I will be surprised, that I will be in awe, that I will have some awesome moments and some awful moments. We remind ourselves that we have the courage to not know which ones are coming or when. Those surprises, those unplanned moments of awe are the moments that often come to define our path. That, as I now look back on our more than a decade of marriage, has been the case. Among the many blessings that we count in our family is the blessing that we share an anniversary with Bill and Anita Block. In part, due to that interrogation over dinner, on June 28th, Carrie and I were married, and we will forever work to catch up on the 6-decade lead that Bill and Anita have on us. The reality is that most of our anniversaries have been spent unpacking boxes. Because rabbinic contracts start on July 1st and our anniversary is just a few days earlier, we've either been unpacking or, because camp happens in the summer, we've been surrounded by a bunch of teenagers with no air conditioning. This year we added a new experience. This year on June 28th, our anniversary, unplanned, we were on a boat getting a tour of the Maine coast. Once again, I could not help but think of that interrogation with Carrie many years earlier. If only I could have shown her a picture of what we were looking at right now, it would have summed up the whole experience of our life together. It was the hottest day of the summer, well into the 90s and humid, and so we dressed everyone in the lightest clothes they had. But it turns out, when you get on a boat on the northern Atlantic coast, the water temperature is cold. Cold enough that there was a 20-degree difference. And it started to rain. 70 degrees and a light drizzle moving 15 miles an hour in what amounted to a convertible is not shorts weather. And our kids let us know. They were bored, they were tired, they were hungry, and of course, they were cold. But then the captain of the boat shouted, "Who wants to pull some lobster traps?" So one after another, as the traps came up, our kids' eyes opened. They wanted to see what animals would be at the end of this rope that was coming out of the ocean. A squid popped up, a bunch of blue crabs crawling around, and then there it was, a big fat lobster on our anniversary. And when the captain asked if anyone wanted to hold this large claw-snapping lobster, most of the kids on the boat immediately grabbed their parents' legs and refused. But not the rabbi's kids. Ezra, our youngest, was first. Then Hannah, then Noah all held the lobsters that we caught, and their eyes lit up. It did not matter that it was cold or that it was raining. They were in awe. And we, as their parents, we were in awe looking at them. So much so that we couldn't even take pictures. We had to get them from these other people who we had never met who were on the boat. And the lobsters, by the way, they were in awe too. You could see it in their little beady eyes. Because you know what? They were the luckiest lobsters to be caught that day. Ezra, Hannah, and Noah, good rabbi's kids, they each threw them right back into the ocean. And so, I want to revise my answer from almost 15 years ago. What does it mean to marry a rabbi? I was right and I was wrong. It is like marrying anyone else, but it is not normal. There is no such thing. What it is an adventure because that is what life is. We can't predict what will happen, but we can expect to be surprised, for better or for worse. Of course, life is not all exciting boat trips. Just days after that trip, as we were making our way back to Ohio, my phone rang. It was my college roommate who I hadn't talked to in months. He explained that 2 weeks ago, he found out that his beloved uncle was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And of course, he was calling because they didn't know how long he would live. He wanted to see if I could do the funeral. We were traveling on our way back, and then we're leaving again to take our daughter to camp. But it wasn't long. He called the next morning. His uncle had died just hours after we spoke. And so we arrived the next day back here in Ohio, and I walked into a room where a family was in awe because something awful had happened. They had lost their husband, their father, their uncle, and their friend, who 3 weeks prior they believed to be perfectly healthy. And yet, they surprised me. They were laughing. They were also crying. But he had lived a good life. He had laughed a lot. He was lost to them far too soon, decades before they thought he would be. But he was a jokester of sorts, so they could not help but smile as they told all of the stories, many of them off color, about how he spent his days. I don't believe in defining God for others, as I have a hard enough time defining God for myself. But there are moments like that one. Moments when you know God is present. Moments like the one we talk about in the Torah where Jacob declares, after struggling all night, God was here and I just did not know it. I could not have told you that one of those moments would be watching my child hold a lobster up on our anniversary or hearing a family laugh again after a tragic and unexpected loss. Looking in the rearview mirror these last few years, we've seen so much change and so much loss. And so let's remind ourselves that that is not the view that shows us the future. For we've always lived during times of incredible change and fear. Maybe they weren't so obvious. Maybe they were not so drastic. But there has never been a time when life was predictable. We were never fully aware of our future. The last year has given us a lot to be afraid of. But that is all in the rearview mirror. It is time on this new day of this new year to face the future and to face it without prediction. Rosh Hashanah does not promise the future will be perfect. It doesn't promise that the fears we've experienced will be eliminated. It simply promises Hayom Harat Olam, the future will be new. And Varachma Harat Olam, that it's pregnant with possibility. And that we are on an adventure. May we have the courage to look in that forward-facing direction, to knock on the door of opportunity that is before us, not just once, but obsessively, until it opens and we're able to walk forward, awaiting what will surprise us, to be curious about our potential and the potential of society. May we know not only that life is an adventure, but that we are life's adventurers. That this is not a new story. This is the story of our people since the days of Genesis. And it is the only thing we can say is true about the story we will live going forward. Shana Tova Umetuka, may this year be a healthier year, a happier year, a year that surprises us more often with what is sweet to us than what is not. May every day be an adventurer, and may we be ready to step out across that threshold and to enjoy what is coming next and to brave whatever scares us, for we have the courage, as we always have, to continue marching forward, holding hands. Amen.